So today I'm going to focus on mental health resilience. And so you must be thinking, well, what is resilience? Resilience means being able to adapt to life's misfortunes and setbacks. We all have them. We will all go through things in our lives where our resilience is tested, and we will go through things where it's extremely difficult to cope, things like grief, financial difficulties, relationship issues, additional stresses that you weren't planning. There's always going to be things that happen that we haven't planned for. So having resilience is really, really important. So just like a child, if we think about when they start to learn to walk, what happens? They fall, but they get up again. They may even get hurt, but they get up again. However, as we start to get older, what happens? As we start becoming young adults and as we get older, that resilience, what happens to that resilience? If we fall, does that deter us? If we go through a bad experience, does that deter us from trying again? Do we give up? So I want you to think about that child that falls again, the child in you that got up again and learned to walk and learned to do all the things that you have done to get you to here today. That resilience is inside of you. Don't think, I am weak, I can't cope with this, how am I going to cope with this? You will, you've done it before, and you will do it again. So World Mental Health Organization says, I'm sorry, my slide seems to have changed from passing them on to Dr. Indrani. Mental health is a fundamental element of the resilience, health assets, capabilities, and positive adaptation that enable people both to cope. Now I can't read the rest of that slide, so I'm going to read it from my handout. And positive adaptation that enables people both to cope with adversity and to reach their full potential and humanity. A few years ago, well, more than a decade ago, I was a victim of a religious hate crime. And that significant experience had a huge impact on me. Not that I have not been a victim of religious hate crime, of racism before that. I have many experiences from my childhood up to now, but that event was significant in my life because it led to me experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. And I was really struggling. And I thought, why? I've been through so many things in my life. Why has this one broken me? Why? When there have been much worse things. We all reach our limits. It was because I had reached my limit. I was carrying too much. But also, I had forgotten to keep on building my resilience. I was on empty at that point. So I think the learning for me at that point was that I had forgotten me. I was so busy giving. At that point, I had forgotten to make sure that I was giving to myself. So my lesson then was, if you want to keep on giving to others and to be able to fulfill the responsibility to others, including my children, I needed to make sure I was giving to myself and I was being responsible with that. So one of the things I enrolled on, as well as having therapy, was art. And whilst doing art, I took up photography and poetry. Poetry is something I did do as a child, but I'd kind of given up. And one day I was in the garden, bit of nature therapy, and I came across a daisy. This daisy that you see here that I'm painting. This daisy was actually in the cracks of a slab. Now, how was this daisy growing? Not in just pure soil, but in the cracks of a slab, all alone. And it made me reflect on my life and how I was feeling just then. I took the photograph and I thought, I'm going to paint that. So not only was that daisy giving me a lesson on my life, but on everyone as a whole and the world, and how we human beings are resilient and how we survive in the most difficult of circumstances. It made me think about emergency workers. who often have to go to the most traumatic situations, how do they clock off and then come the next day back on shift again? We've just been through COVID and we clapped for our NHS heroes. So many people who saw so much death, and then they're still resilient. They go on again and again. This is why this resilience is so important. So I'm going to read something out that I wrote at the time. I wrote a very short poem, but it described how I was feeling and how I interpreted that daisy. The lone daisy.